Hey Power Platform Junkies, welcome back. I know it's been a while. Today we're going to try and look at how you can take responses from a Microsoft form and send them to a SharePoint list, but also try to make sure that if the responses have an attachment that comes with them, how do we tie that attachment on the same SharePoint list item instead of sending the attachment itself to a document library of that same SharePoint site. So stick around and see how we can be able to build this out using Power Automate. So we're on my desktop and I have this proof of payment submission form built with Microsoft Forms where I can collect the responses from my clients. And the idea behind this scenario is for clients who have made payments to purchase a service or a product from me. And what I want is to get all of the information, their full name, the address, but also what's most important is the proof of payment that they will attach to say they've made the payment so they can get that service or product that we're offering, so they can submit this. The idea is to take whatever responses that they provide on Microsoft Forms and store it in SharePoint and make sure that whenever we create that item in a SharePoint list, we take the attachment itself, we tie it into the SharePoint list item instead of it being stored in a document library within that same SharePoint site, in which we'll look at it just a few minutes from now. Right, so this is the form. If we head back and we look back at the view responses, so I'm in the edit mode of the form and I click on view responses. On the form with the response that I've already put there is I can see the full name, I can see the values around the email address, the reference number, the payment date, and even the attachment itself. And I can also open these results in Excel. Now, I like to have these in a much more structured way. This is okay already, so I have no issue with it. So this is okay. I can be able to, what I want to do is to actually see this in a much more unified view, which SharePoint would give me that opportunity to actually view it in a much more structured way instead of having to view it by each column like this or by each field the way that it's specified on the form itself. Speaking of which, let's look at our SharePoint list. So our SharePoint list has title, reference number, email, payment date, which is all of reference number as well, which is all of the some of the columns that we have on our form. And I'm going to use title as something that's going to probably store the full name of the client, and everything else will just map to what we have on the form. Now, you'll notice there is no column for attachments that I created. I did not create a column for attachments. Why? Because when you create a SharePoint list, you are able to get attachments as an already inbuilt column. So all you have to do is to maybe right click, for an example, on one of the columns, go to column settings and choose show or hide columns, and you will see a list of columns that are already built into the SharePoint list, and you will show the attachments column if you want to see the attachments column on your SharePoint list. Right, the idea is to have everything here instead of having everything stored in separate places. And what I mean by that, with the SharePoint list, you'll have the item that we're sending from the Microsoft form being stored here. And in some cases, some people would store the attachments in the document library that comes with the SharePoint site. So that's where they would be storing the attachment. So we don't want to do that. What we want to do is to have everything in the SharePoint list. So how do we do this? Let's head over to Power Automate. In Power Automate, I have this flow that's already created. I have a trigger, and I picked the form ID, which is the proof of payment submission form. All we need to do now is to set up the action. So I can choose Microsoft Forms here or search for it. When I choose Microsoft Forms, I need to choose Get Response Details because I need to get the response details whenever a new response is submitted. All I have to do is to provide the form ID, and then the response ID will come via the dynamic content, and then that's going to be set up. Now, the next step is to create the item. So it's to take the response that we get from the Microsoft form and send it to SharePoint or to the SharePoint list. So we're going to add a new action here, and I'm going to search for create item. And when I search for create item, this is where I want to make sure that I'm sending the response back. So it's going to use SharePoint. So I'm going to choose create an item, and I will need to specify the SharePoint site, the site address that my item is going to do, where my list is existing. So I'm going to provide here, and one of those SharePoint sites is the Power Platform Jenkins SharePoint site that I'm using. And then the list name is going to be the customer payments list that is within that SharePoint site. Now, what's going to happen is the advanced parameters are going to go from 1 to 6, so it's not showing all of them. The minute I click on this drop down, I can see some of the columns. I can choose which columns I want to fill in, so it would be the title, reference number. The title is going to be full name, and then it's going to be email and the payment date. And you can see attachments is not showing up as an available column that we can send values to. So let's choose those. And then for title, it's going to be full name. So we just fill in the dynamic content that is coming from the previous action. So let's go ahead and do all of that. Okay, so we have all of the dynamic content filled in for each of the individual columns that we want to look at inside of our SharePoint list. We want to fill in the full name, the reference number, the name, and the payment date. But the big question is, how do we then get the attachment that is coming from the form into the SharePoint list? But the first thing before we can answer that question is to test this flow. So I'm going to save my flow. And then once I've saved my flow, we're going to test it, and then we're going to review the results, because there's something that we actually need to get that attachment from the form itself, because we can't necessarily just directly get it from the dynamic content. Like, for example, if I were to try here and I go to the dynamic content and I choose upload proof of payment, that might not work the way that I think it would, right? Because here it will just choose the column. Okay, cool. So this is saved. It's time for us to test this flow. So I'm going to click on test flow. I'll say manually, and I'm going to try to submit a new response. Okay, so I've submitted a new response. Let's see if it's going to pick up as part of the testing that we're doing for this flow. Okay, seems like it ran successfully. It's creating an item. So if we go back to our SharePoint list to actually review the items, I want to refresh here. We can see the new item, which is Someleze John, the reference number, the email, the payment date, and we can see attachments has nothing, even though there's an attachment that was added on the response. So if I head back to Power Automate so we can be able to get the ball rolling on this, head back to Power Automate, and I select the get response details action, so that I can review how it ran or successfully ran. So I can review the details or the successful run of the get response details action in my flow. So if I scroll down and I go show raw outputs, here what we're going to look at, we're going to try and look at the different fields, or different fields that we're using in the form. So we can see that we have the name. I don't know why it's calling it like this. So we have the full name of the responder, we have the email, we have the invoice, and we also have the payment date that they provide in their response. You will notice here, this is supposed to be the attachment, or the user is uploading the attachment, or the client is uploading the proof of payment. You will notice here that we have this object. This object is actually the attachment that we're looking for. It's coming from the attachments field. So how do we then be able to get all of this? You can see that it's a JSON object, and we want to make sure that we get the entire thing, even the attachment itself. So how are we able to get the attachment from that object. So the first thing that we're going to do, because it's an object and the JSON object at that, is to do something called Parse JSON. And when we say Parse JSON, I think the first thing that we're going to do is to just add the action and use data operation to use the Parse JSON. So we choose Parse JSON, and then it will ask us get content to create a schema from, and we'll provide dynamic content to that upload proof of payment field from the form, and then we need to provide the schema. Where's the schema? Now what we need to do is to actually copy the schema from the successful flow run. That's the reason why we were testing this, because we already had a schema from there. So I'm gonna go and copy it from the successful flow run and then paste it in here. So I've copied my my schema. All I have to do is to use sample payload to generate a schema. So if you're following along, you could do the same. Just copy the schema from the successful flow run of that action, and then come back here and click on use sample payload to generate a schema, and I am just going to paste it in here, and it's going to obviously cry about something, because obviously the schema is not an actual valid JSON object. So you would need to make sure that you make that schema that you copy from the output of that action to be a valid JSON object. So I'm going to do that. So I've gone ahead and made it into a valid JSON object. What I did was, in case you're wondering, is just remove the extra square brackets that were there that made it into an array, and then there were characters, the backward slashes, that looked like this in almost each of these fields. So all you have to do is just to remove those backslash characters, so that you can make sure that it's a valid JSON schema. This is just simple because of this specific object, but you could use tools to try and make it into a valid JSON schema. So in case you're wondering, you can do that. Just remove those backward slashes and you should be fine. So I'm going to press done here, and then it's created a schema for me, and will be able to now get me specific fields that I might be looking for, like for example the name field, because that one had the attachment that we're looking for. So what's the next step? The next step is to actually get the file content using a specific the file content of the attachment using a specific path. So what we're going to use is get file content from the OneDrive connector. So I'm going to add a new action here. When we search for get file content, we will use the get file content using a path, because we're going to provide a path to the file. Once I've set up my connections, I can then be able to see this option to provide the file path. So how we can provide the file path, I'm going to go and click on open folder, and then I am going to navigate the root folder, choose apps. So I'm going to navigate to apps as well, and then from apps I'm going to navigate to Microsoft Forms, because FYI, that's where some of the attachment files go to in OneDrive for Business when you are getting responses from a form. And then I'm going to navigate that, and I have this proof of payment submission form, and then continue to navigate forward. And then once I've navigated forward, I am going to just select this folder called question, right? So once I've selected the folder question, obviously now it's actually telling me that I can choose the attachments that were already there from the previous responses that I made, but that's not what I am looking for. So what we are going to do, we can't select the file path. That's the surprise that I'm getting as I'm doing this. We can't select the file path, but instead we need to hard code it onto the field that is required from. So I'm going to do that. Okay, so I've already done that. So I put in this hard-coded file path instead of selecting it, because it's not allowing me to select it. That was a surprise that I got. So you might have the same surprise if you're following along. But it doesn't stop there. We want the actual we want the actual attachment, and we can be able to get that actual attachment because we've done a parse JSON, and that parse JSON is going to put it in an array of objects as you are submitting these responses, and it has an attachment to it. You'll have an array of attachments that's sitting inside of this folder, which is a question folder. So now we can be able to use an expression to select that specific attachment that just got in from the newest response. So what we're going to do is choose insert an expression, and we're going to use the first expression where we get the dynamic content from the parse JSON, and already we know that the attachment is coming from the name column of that JSON object that we saw earlier on that we tried to format. So I'm going to choose the name of this parse JSON, and your expression should look something like this, and then select add, and that should be fine to get the file content of this specific attachment from your form. The next step now is to just tie the attachment itself to the item that is on SharePoint, and we should be able to see that just now. How do you do that? Just adding your action and search for add attachment. Once we search for add attachment, obviously it's with SharePoint, so we choose add attachment from SharePoint. Once you've done that, you just provide the details of your SharePoint site. Then you provide the ID of the item that you want to tie that specific attachment that you're getting from OneDrive. So the ID would be of the item that is created right now. It's like we are updating an already existing item in SharePoint. So we're going to use dynamic content, choose the ID from the create item action, and then for the name we can use the same name that was used when the file was uploaded, or you could in a way change it based off of your preference, but in this case we're just going to use the original name. So I'm going to use the dynamic content and go to the parse JSON action and choose the body name. Then for file content, the file content is coming from this previous action, get file content using a path, because we've already done that, getting the file content using OneDrive. So we're going to use the dynamic content and choose get file content. Okay, great. This is the entire flow that you need, which is when a new response is submitted, get the response details, then create the item on SharePoint, then parse the JSON to get the JSON object, get the file content using one of the attributes or columns from the JSON object. Obviously, you're getting the file content from OneDrive, and then add that content as an attachment to your SharePoint list. Let's actually see. Now it's the moment of truth. Let's test that out. So I'm going to save my flow, and then after this, we are going to be able to see if when we are submitting a new response on the form and we add an attachment, will that attachment show up in our SharePoint list. So I'm going to go and test this flow, and I'm going to say manually test, and then we're going to go to the form itself, and we're going to get another response. Okay, so we've submitted a new response. Now we need to see if our flow ran successfully. So if we go back to Power Automate, we'll see that, oh no, we have an error. And what's the error? The schema validation actually failed. And that's a great error. It's a great start. So we need to be able to troubleshoot and see what's going on. So I'm going to quickly troubleshoot and then let you know what was the error. So I went back to edit the parse JSON action, and I have a theory that the error was the square brackets that I removed. So I'll put the square brackets back on, because the schema that is submitted from the content that we're getting from the form has those square brackets. So you need to make sure that the square brackets are there. So I'm going to select done and test this again. So how we're going to test it is going to be automatically, because obviously we tried to run we tried to run the Power Automate flow just now, or we can just do it manually. So I'm going to say save and test and actually see if it's going to be okay. So all I'm going to do now is submit another response, and then once I've submitted the other response, we're going to come back to the flow and see if it ran successfully. So let's try it again. So submit another response, just the same thing. Okay, now it's time for the moment of truth. We need to submit this new response, and hopefully now our Power Automate flow would have ran successfully, since we fixed that schema validation error that we were getting there, because we had silly me decided to remove the square brackets. Oh, more errors, which is a great thing. More errors. We need to make sure that we are able to fix the errors that you're getting. So this is a learning experience as you are going through fixing or going through building these kinds of flow and see what kinds of errors that you're getting. So here it's just telling you that the this expression could not be evaluated because the property name cannot be selected. So the array elements can only be selected using an integer index, which is interesting, right? Because now it's no longer an object, it's an array. So we're gonna see if it's going to work later on. Okay, so I think I found the issue with the getting the file content. The first issue that I noticed was the expression that I was using. So you might have to go back and fix the expression. On the expression, you have to say first, and you use the Parse JSON inside of the first function, so as its parameter, and close the round bracket, and then after that you put the question mark, and then you just use you just make sure that you use the name column or the name field from our Parse JSON. What I was doing is putting everything inside of here. So I had it this way. I had this inside of here, which is a no-go. That's not going to behave the way we want it to. So we need to move this outside of the first, because this comes in as an array, and we want to select the first item in that array, which is using the name column. So that's fine. So we're going to select update there. And then another error that I made is when we were using this expression is that we removed in our path, we removed the forward slashes that will allow us to have a proper path, right? So I need to add another forward slash, because the last time I did a forward slash here, and then I chose insert expression, which removed the forward slash, and then now it's not finding the attachment itself. So what I'm going to do is put a forward slash there, and then with a fixed expression. Hopefully you guys caught that. And then after that, I'm going to just save and test this flow, and hopefully this time we have everything up and running, and it's working the way that we intended it. So I'm going to select test, and in our selecting test, it seems like we have another error that's showing up, and I think it's probably sorted itself out now. So if I go and I select test, and I'm going to say automatically, which I'm going to use the failed test, and then I'm going to test it. It's going to use that same response that we actually submitted earlier on, that had the attachment, obviously, that we uploaded with that response. And it seems like we have more errors, which is, it's a fun thing to do. So if I click on edit again, what we're going to see is we used the wrong parse one. So I'm going to go forward slash, I'm going to choose body name, and when I reach select, because of the edits that I made, when I reselect, it will then put this into an array, because into a apply to each or for each, because obviously the attachments are sitting in an array in our parse.json. Right, so that should be fine. We should sort out that error that we had earlier on, and then we're going to test again, automatically save and test. And part of learning is actually just going through building these Power Automate flows, having challenges, getting the errors that you're getting. And then once you get those errors, obviously what's going to then happen is you need to troubleshoot and actually see what's going on in the background to make sure that your Power Automate flow is working. So we're going to see just now if the attachment was added. So the flow is running and it ran successfully. Yippee, yay! And hopefully you can put in the comments congratulations after struggling with so many errors. And then I am going to go back to my SharePoint list, refresh, just to show you what we're looking for. So this has been creating all of these items because obviously we were testing and it was failing after creating the items step in our Power Automate flow. But now what we're going to see, the latest one here at the bottom, has an attachment thingy showing up there. So this is what we've been fighting for, to get the attachments in the same place instead of having the attachments sitting in the document library. All I can do now is to try and probably view this item, and I can see the attachment added to the SharePoint list item, and then after that I can click on the attachment itself, and I've added the attachment. Obviously this is not a proof of payment, but yes, it's a picture of me here. Okay, cool. Seems like we're able to do what we're looking for. We're able to get responses from a form, send it to a SharePoint list, and then once we've sent that into a SharePoint list, we're able to put the attachment next to and tie it to that SharePoint list item. So hopefully you guys learned something today and you'll be able to apply this for your own use cases. This was just following a random use case that I made up for this specific video. And yeah, please make sure to help the community grow by subscribing and liking those videos that are being put out by different individuals sharing their different experiences with building out solutions using the Power Platform. Other than that, I will see you on the next one and have a great day.